The silence at dinner should have been my first warning. For 3 months now, my children had been visiting more frequently than they had in years. Marcus every Tuesday evening, Rebecca stopping by Thursday afternoons, Daniel appearing for coffee every Sunday morning. After Martha's death 3 years ago, I'd been grateful for their renewed attention. Lonely old men don't question sudden kindness from their offspring. But tonight, sitting across from Marcus in the same dining room where I'd taught him to count money from my construction wages, something felt different. Wrong. "Dad, you're 75 now," Marcus said, cutting his steak with surgical precision. "Have you thought about what happens if your health takes a turn?" I set down my fork, studying my eldest son's face. At 48, Marcus had inherited his mother's sharp eyes and my stubborn jaw, but there was something calculating in his expression that reminded me of neither parent. "My health is fine, son. I know. But what if it wasn't? What if you fell or had another episode like last winter?" Last winter. The flu that had landed me in the hospital for 4 days. I'd been discharged with clean bills of health, but somehow that brief stay had become family legend evidence of my declining condition. "Marcus, I had the flu. Not a stroke." "Of course, Dad. I'm just saying we should be prepared. Rebecca thinks we should look into getting some legal documents in order. You know, power of attorney, that sort of thing." Rebecca. My daughter, the lawyer, who hadn't set foot in this house for 2 years before Martha died, suddenly concerned about my legal affairs. "What kind of documents?" Marcus reached into his briefcase. He'd brought a briefcase to dinner with his father and pulled out a folder. "Nothing complicated. Just some paperwork that would let us help you if you couldn't make decisions yourself." The papers were professional, official-looking. I recognized the letterhead, Brennan and Associates, one of the most expensive law firms in the city. Not the kind of place you went for simple family planning. "Who paid for these to be drawn up?" "Dad, don't worry about that. We're just trying to look out for you." The evasion was smooth, practiced. How many times had he rehearsed this conversation? I pretended to read the documents while my mind raced. The language was complex, full of legal terms I didn't understand, but one phrase jumped out. "In the event of cognitive decline or impaired judgment." "Marcus, this gives you complete control over my finances." "Only if something happens to you, Dad. Only if you can't handle things yourself." "And who decides if I can't handle things myself?" Another pause. Another evasion. "There would be medical evaluations, of course. Professional assessments." "Whose idea was this?" "Dad, we're all concerned. Rebecca, Daniel, and I have been talking." "You've been talking about me." "About your welfare, yes." I closed the folder and set it aside. "I need to think about this." Marcus's jaw tightened to tell he'd inherited from me. "Dad, these things take time to process. If we wait until there's an emergency..." I said I need to think about it. After Marcus left, I sat in my living room staring at that folder. The house felt too quiet, too empty, filled with echoes of conversations that had apparently been happening without me. I walked to Martha's old desk and pulled out the address book she'd maintained with religious precision. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, my physician for 15 years. I'd known Sarah since she was a resident, had watched her build her practice, had trusted her with Martha's care during those final months. The next morning, I called her office. "William, what can I do for you? Feeling all right?" "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Always am. Have any of my children contacted you about my mental health?" The pause was brief but telling. "William, why would you ask that? Please, just answer the question." Another pause. Longer this time. "Yes. Marcus called last month. He was concerned about he mentioned some incidents." My stomach dropped. What kind of incidents? He said you've been giving money to strangers. Large amounts. He was worried about your judgment. The money? 3 weeks ago, I'd helped Jenny Martinez, my housekeeper, cover her grandson's emergency surgery. $5,000, given freely to a woman who'd been cleaning my house for 8 years and had never asked for anything more than fair wages. Sarah, did you tell him anything? Of course not. Patient confidentiality. But William, if you're having concerns about your cognitive health, I'm not. But apparently my children are. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to my bank and asked for copies of all transactions from the past 6 months. Account statements, check images, deposit slips. All of it. The pattern was there in black and white. Regular withdrawals that coincided with my children's visits. The check to Jenny for her grandson's surgery. The money I'd given to Tommy Chin, the neighborhood kid who'd been accepted to engineering school but couldn't afford tuition. The donation to the animal shelter where Martha had volunteered. Every act of kindness, every generous impulse, documented and dated. Evidence of what they were calling impaired judgment. That evening, Daniel made his usual Sunday visit a day early. Hey, Dad. Thought I'd stop by, see how you're doing. I'm doing fine, son. How are Michelle and the kids? Good, good. Listen, Dad, Marcus mentioned he stopped by yesterday. Said you seemed a little confused about some of the paperwork. Confused. Not cautious. Not thoughtful. Confused. I wasn't confused, Daniel. I was being careful. Of course, of course. It's just that these legal things can be complicated. Maybe it would help if Rebecca explained everything. You know how good she is with contracts and stuff. Rebecca, who'd been researching elder law for the past 3 months, according to the Google search history on the computer she'd borrowed to check her email during her last visit. Daniel, can I ask you something? Sure, Dad. When was the last time you visited me just because you wanted to spend time with your old man? The question caught him off guard. I watched him calculate, trying to remember a visit that hadn't been connected to paperwork or concerns about Dad's health. Dad, I always want to spend time with you. That's why I'm here. Are you? Or are you here because you and your siblings have decided I'm becoming incompetent? Dad, nobody thinks you're incompetent. We just want to make sure you're protected. Protected? From whom? From my own decisions? From my own generosity? That night, I called Jennifer Walsh. I'd met her at Martha's funeral 3 years ago, where she'd quietly handed me her card and said, "When you need someone who understands families, call me." I'd kept that card in my wallet for 3 years, never thinking I'd need it. Mr. Patterson, I remember you. How can I help? Jennifer, I think my children are trying to have me declared mentally incompetent. That's a serious allegation. What makes you think so? I told her about the documents, about Marcus's evasions, about the questions to my doctor, about the pattern of visits that had started after I'd begun helping people they considered strangers. Mr. Patterson, can you come to my office tomorrow? And bring any documentation you have about your finances, your health, any correspondence with your children. Is this really happening, Jennifer? Are my own children really doing this? Her sigh carried the weight of experience. Mr. Patterson, I've been practicing elder law for 20 years. What you're describing is more common than you think. And it usually gets worse before it gets better. I hung up the phone and walked through my house, the house I'd built with my own hands, paid for with 50 years of sweat and overtime. Every room held memories of the family I'd raised, the children I'd loved unconditionally. But love, I was beginning to understand, didn't always run both ways. And the children I'd raised to be successful might have learned lessons I'd never intended to teach. Tomorrow, I would begin to find out exactly what those lessons were. If this story is touching your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more stories that matter. Jennifer Walsh's office was nothing like the sterile corporate environment I'd expected. Warm wood furniture, family photos on her desk, and the kind of comfortable chairs that suggested she'd spent many hours listening to difficult family stories. Mr. Patterson, thank you for coming in so quickly. I've reviewed the documents you brought, and I have some questions. She spread my bank statements across her desk like a detective examining evidence. 6 months of transactions, each one telling a story I was only beginning to understand. This withdrawal for $5,000 to Jenny Martinez, tell me about that. I explained about Jenny's grandson, the emergency surgery, the family's desperate need for help. How Jenny had worked for me for 8 years without ever asking for a raise or time off, even when her own mother was ill. And this $8,000 to Thomas Chen? Tommy, the kid next door who'd been cutting my grass since he was 14, who'd spent last Christmas Day with me because his own family was visiting relatives in California, who'd been accepted to engineering school but couldn't afford the tuition without crushing student loans. Mr. Patterson, in your children's view, these are evidence of poor judgment. Large sums given to non-family members. They're not non-family to me. Jennifer made notes on her legal pad. I need you to understand something. What your children are building is called a pattern of diminished capacity. They'll argue that you're being taken advantage of by opportunistic people who've recognized your vulnerability. The words stung because I could hear my children saying them. Marcus's voice explaining how Dad's being manipulated by people who see an easy target. But there's something else I need to tell you, Jennifer continued. Yesterday, after you called, I made some inquiries. Your daughter Rebecca has been consulting with elder law specialists about guardianship procedures. My stomach lurched. Guardianship? Complete legal control over another adult's person and property. It's what happens when someone is deemed legally incapable of making their own decisions. I thought about the folder Marcus had brought, the careful language about cognitive decline and impaired judgment. They weren't just planning to control my money. They were planning to control me. How long have they been planning this? Based on what I've learned, at least 3 months. Possibly longer. 3 months. That's when the visits had started. When Marcus began stopping by every Tuesday, when Rebecca started her Thursday afternoon check-ins, when Daniel's Sunday morning coffee visits became a religious routine. I thought they were finally making time for their old man. Instead, they'd been documenting evidence. Jennifer leaned forward, her expression gentle but serious. Mr. Patterson, I need you to think carefully about your history with your children. Not the good memories, those are real and valid. But I need you to think about the patterns of your relationship with them as adults. So I did. I went back to the basement when I got home, to the boxes I hadn't opened since Martha died. The archaeology of 50 years of fatherhood, stored in cardboard containers that smelled of time and regret. Marcus's box came first. His college acceptance letter to State University, the expensive one. I remembered his excitement, his certainty that this was his path to success. I also remembered the sticker shock. $35,000 a year when I was making $45,000 total. Dad, it's an investment, he'd said, 18 years old and full of confidence. Think of it as buying stock in my future. I'd taken a second mortgage on the house. Martha had cried that night, not from sadness but from fear. We were 45 years old with no retirement savings, betting everything on our son's potential. Marcus graduated summa cum laude and landed a job with a real estate development company. Within 5 years, he was making more money than I'd ever imagined possible. But when I'd suggested he help pay down that second mortgage, he'd looked at me like I'd asked him to set his money on fire. "Dad, that was your choice to make. I never asked you to pay for college." Your choice. As if an 18-year-old's dreams hadn't been worth a father's sacrifice. Rebecca's box held different memories, but the same patterns. Law school at Northwestern, another expensive choice. The LSAT prep courses I'd paid for. The application fees, the interview trips, the deposit to hold her spot. $120,000 in student loans that I'd co-signed because her credit wasn't established enough to qualify a loan. When she graduated and joined a prestigious firm, I'd mentioned how nice it would be to get those loans paid off. "Daddy, I'm barely making ends meet in the city. Do you know what rent costs in Chicago?" She was making $85,000 a year as a first-year associate. I was making $52,000 as a construction supervisor with 30 years of experience. But she couldn't help with the loans I'd co-signed to make her success possible. Daniel's box was the heaviest, both physically and emotionally. My youngest had always been different from his siblings, more sensitive, more thoughtful. Or so I believed. His business degree from State University. His MBA from Northwestern. The wedding expenses I covered when his fiance's family ran into financial difficulties. The down payment I'd helped with for their first house. The bailout money when his first business venture failed. $200,000 over 15 years, carefully documented in the bank statements Jennifer had asked me to review. $200,000 in help that had never been repaid or even acknowledged as debt. But it was the smaller items in Daniel's box that broke my heart. Father's Day cards from when he was little, filled with misspelled declarations of love and crayon drawings of us playing catch. Report cards where he'd written, "Love you, Dad," in careful second-grade handwriting. When had that little boy, who thought his father was a hero, become a man who saw him as a burden? I found Martha's diary in the last box, the one she'd kept during her final illness. I'd never read it before. It felt like an invasion of her privacy, even though privacy ends with death. But tonight, I needed to hear her voice. March 15th. William is wearing himself out trying to take care of me and still help the kids with their problems. Marcus needs money for his business expansion, Rebecca's having marriage troubles, and Daniel's worried about the baby coming. Sometimes I wonder if they see their father as a person or just as a solution to their problems. March 22nd. I tried to talk to Rebecca today about maybe giving her father some emotional support instead of just asking for financial support. She said I was being dramatic, that Dad's fine, that he's always been strong enough to handle everything. But I can see how tired he is. How lonely, even with all of us around. April 3rd. The kids visited today. All 3 of them. They spent 2 hours discussing what they'll do with the house after we're gone, while we're sitting right here listening. William pretended not to notice, but I saw his face. They're already dividing up our lives like we're not still living them. April 10th. I worry about what will happen to William after I'm gone. The kids love him, I know they do. But they love what he can provide more than who he is. I hope he finds people who see him for himself, not for what he can give them. I closed the diary and sat in my basement surrounded by 50 years of evidence. Evidence of love given freely and rarely returned. Evidence of sacrifice made willingly and never acknowledged. Evidence of children who'd learned to see their father as an endless source of solutions rather than a human being with his own needs. Martha had seen it. Even dying, she'd seen what I'd been too blind or too proud to recognize. But the children I'd raised to be successful had learned to be successful at my expense. And now that I was old, now that Martha was gone, now that I was becoming more burden than benefit, They'd found a legal way to complete the process they'd been engaged in for decades. They were going to take control of everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, everything I was. And they were going to do it with the cold efficiency of the successful adults I'd taught them to become. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The coffee shop on Fifth Street had been our family's unofficial meeting place for 20 years. It was where I'd celebrated Marcus's first real estate deal, where I'd comforted Rebecca through her divorce, where I'd listened to Daniel's dreams of starting his own financial consulting firm. The worn wooden tables and mismatched chairs held decades of Patterson family history. Now, as I sat waiting for Marcus to arrive for our Monday morning meeting, those memories felt like artifacts from someone else's life. I called each of my children separately over the weekend, requesting individual conversations. Not family meetings or group discussions, but one-on-one talks with each of them. I needed to understand if what I discovered was the whole truth, or if there was still some part of my children that remembered who I used to be to them. Marcus arrived exactly on time, as always. 48 years old, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check, carrying the same leather briefcase he'd brought to dinner last week. He looked every inch the successful businessman I'd helped him become. "Dad, you sounded serious on the phone. Everything okay?" I studied my eldest son's face, looking for traces of the boy who'd once spent entire Saturdays helping me build a treehouse in the backyard. That boy had been fascinated by every tool, every measurement, every decision I made. He'd asked endless questions about why wood needed to be seasoned, how to read a level, what made a foundation strong. "Marcus, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." He shifted in his chair, his business instincts engaging. "Of course, Dad. Do you think I'm losing my mind?" The question hung between us like smoke. Marcus's eyes flickered with something, surprise, guilt, calculation, before settling into a careful expression of concern. "Dad, why would you ask something like that?" "Because last week you brought me legal documents that would give you control over my finances if I'm declared mentally incompetent. Because you've been talking to my doctor about my judgment. Because you've been documenting every dollar I spend as evidence of cognitive decline." Marcus's face flushed red, but his voice remained steady. Professional. "Dad, I think you're misunderstanding the situation." "Am I? Then explain it to me." He leaned forward, adopting the posture of a patient teacher addressing a slow student. "Dad, you're 75 years old. You live alone in a big house. You've been making some questionable financial decisions lately. Such as $5,000 to the housekeeper, Dad. $8,000 to the neighbor kid. These aren't family members. These are people who see a lonely old man with money and they're taking advantage of your good nature." The condescension in his voice was surgical in its precision. He'd reduced my acts of kindness to evidence of senility, my generosity to proof of exploitation. "Marcus, Jenny Martinez has worked for me for 8 years. She's never asked for a raise, never taken a sick day, never done anything but take excellent care of your mother and me. When her grandson needed emergency surgery and she didn't have insurance, I helped her. That's not poor judgment. That's decency. Dad, $5,000 is a fraction of what I spent on your college education. A fraction of what I've given you over the years for business investments, house down payments, and bailouts when your deals went bad." Marcus straightened, his professional mask slipping slightly. "That's different. I'm your son, and that makes you automatically more deserving of my money than a woman who's shown me genuine care and loyalty? Dad, you're twisting things around. We're trying to protect you. From what? From being generous to people who've earned it. From making my own decisions about my own money?" The coffee shop buzzed with morning conversation around us, other families and friends sharing casual moments that didn't require legal documentation or medical evaluations. I envied them their easy relationships, their uncomplicated love. Marcus, let me ask you this. When was the last time you visited me just because you wanted to spend time with your father? He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. I watched him mentally flip through recent visits, looking for one that hadn't involved paperwork or concerns about my competency. I always want to spend time with you, Dad. That's not what I asked. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out another folder. Dad, maybe this will help you understand our concerns. Inside were photographs. Pictures of my house, my yard, my daily routines. Me talking to Tommy Chin over the back fence. Me hugging Jenny Martinez on her grandson's birthday. Me writing a check at the animal shelter where Martha used to volunteer. You've been watching me. We've been worried about you. These pictures show a pattern of inappropriate attachment to non-family members, combined with increasingly erratic financial behavior. Inappropriate attachment to people who actually cared whether I lived or died. Marcus, who took these pictures? Sarah hired a private investigator. Just to document. Your wife hired a private investigator to spy on me? Marcus's face went pale. He revealed more than he intended. Dad, it's not spying. It's documentation. If we ever need to prove that you're being influenced by people with ulterior motives. I stood up so abruptly that my chair scraped against the floor, drawing stares from other customers. Get out. Dad, get out of here. Now. Marcus gathered his papers with quick, efficient movements, his business training overriding any emotional response he might have had. Dad, I hope you'll reconsider. We're trying to do what's best for you. What's best for me is being left alone by people who see me as a problem to be managed instead of a father to be loved. After Marcus left, I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, staring at my untouched coffee and trying to process what I'd learned. My own children had hired investigators to watch me. They documented my kindness as evidence of incompetence. They'd built a case against my mental capacity with the thoroughness of prosecutors preparing for trial. Tuesday afternoon, I met Rebecca at her law office downtown. The glass and steel building stretched 30 stories into the sky, a monument to the kind of success I'd helped finance. Rebecca's office was on the 20th floor, with windows that offered a panoramic view of the city I'd helped build with my own hands. Daddy, this is a nice surprise. Rebecca stood up from behind a desk that looked like it belonged in a corporate boardroom rather than a daughter's office. At 45, she'd inherited Martha's graceful bearing and sharp intelligence, but there was a coldness in her eyes that reminded me of neither parent. Rebecca, I need to ask you about something. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. The client chair, I realized. Even in her own office, she was positioning me as someone who needed her professional services. Marcus mentioned you two had coffee yesterday. He said you seemed upset about the estate planning documents. Estate planning. That's what they were calling it now. Rebecca, are you researching ways to have me declared mentally incompetent? Her lawyer training kicked in immediately. I could see her mind working, cataloging potential responses, measuring admissions against denials. Daddy, where did you get that idea? Answer the question. She leaned back in her chair, adopting the posture of a professional explaining complex concepts to a layperson. Daddy, I've been researching elder law, yes. It's a complicated field, and I wanted to understand our options if you ever needed help making decisions. Our options, not my options. Daddy, you're 75 years old. Statistics show that cognitive decline becomes increasingly likely after age 70. I'm simply being prepared. Prepared for what, exactly? Rebecca opened a folder on her desk. Another folder, more documentation of my supposed decline. Daddy, your recent financial decisions have been concerning. Large gifts to non-family members, donations to organizations you've never supported before, spending patterns that suggest possible exploitation. The animal shelter where your mother volunteered for 10 years? That's an organization I've never supported. You've never donated that much before. Because I never had that much to give before. Your mother's life insurance, the sale of the business partnership shares, the maturation of investments I made 30 years ago. I finally have the resources to help people who matter to me. People who matter to you. Rebecca's voice carried a chill that could have frozen water. What about the people who've always mattered to you? What about your family? What about them? You make more money than I ever dreamed of. Marcus owns 3 properties and drives a car that costs more than my first house. Daniel's been building his investment portfolio with clients who pay him more in fees than I made in some entire years. That's not the point, Daddy. Then what is the point? Rebecca leaned forward, her eyes sharp with the intensity of a litigator making a closing argument. The point is that you're being manipulated by people who've recognized your vulnerability. The point is that you're making decisions that jeopardize your own security and our family's legacy. Our family's legacy. Code words for our inheritance. Rebecca, let me ask you something. If I died tomorrow, what would you miss most about me? The question clearly caught her off guard. She started to give what sounded like a prepared answer, then stopped herself. I'd miss knowing you were there. Would you? Or would you miss knowing my money was there? Daddy, that's not fair. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Fair would be having a daughter who calls to check on me without wanting legal advice on guardianship procedures. Fair would be having children who see my generosity as kindness instead of mental illness. I stood up, my joints protesting after sitting in her uncomfortable modern chair. Rebecca, I raised you to be successful. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. But somewhere along the way, you confuse success with entitlement. Daddy, please. Let's not fight about this. We're not fighting, sweetheart. We're finally being honest. Thursday evening, I drove to Daniel's house for the first time in 2 years. The subdivision was new, expensive, full of young families with manicured lawns and 2-car garages. Daniel's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, a colonial-style monument to suburban success. Michelle answered the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. William, what a surprise! Daniel's in his home office. Let me get him. The living room was decorated in magazine perfection, neutral colors, matching furniture, nothing out of place. Family photos lined the mantelpiece, but I noticed most of them were of Michelle's family. The few that included me were from years ago, before Martha died, before I'd apparently become an inconvenience. Daniel appeared in jeans and a polo shirt, looking younger and more relaxed than his siblings, but carrying the same careful expression I'd seen on Marcus and Rebecca's faces. Dad, come on back to the office. We can talk privately there. His home office was a shrine to financial success. Diplomas, awards, photos with clients, bookshelves filled with investment guides and economic forecasts. The desk was covered with charts and graphs that probably represented other people's money, other people who trusted Daniel to make smart decisions with their life savings. Dad, Marcus and Rebecca said you've been asking some tough questions. Daniel, do you think your mother would be proud of the man you've become? The question hit him like a physical blow. I watched him struggle with an answer, his face cycling through emotions I hadn't seen since he was a child. Dad, that's not. I mean, of course she'd be proud. I'm successful. I have a good family. I'm financially stable. That's not what I asked. Daniel sat down heavily in his desk chair, suddenly looking older than his 42 years. Dad, what do you want me to say? I want you to tell me the truth. Do you think your mother would be proud of children who hire private investigators to spy on their father? Who build legal cases against his mental competency? Who see his kindness as evidence of senility? Dad, we're not trying to hurt you. Then what are you trying to do? Daniel ran his hands through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. Dad, we're scared. Of what? Of losing you. Of watching you get taken advantage of by people who don't really care about you. Of seeing everything you and Mom worked for get frittered away by strangers who figured out how to manipulate your emotions. Daniel, the people you're worried about, Jenny, Tommy, Dr. Mitchell, the folks at the animal shelter, these are people who've shown me genuine care and loyalty. More than I can say for my own children lately. That's not true, Dad. We love you. Do you? Or do you love what I represent? Security, inheritance, legacy? Daniel's office fell silent, except for the ticking of an expensive clock on his bookshelf. Finally, he looked up at me with tears in his eyes. Dad, I don't know how to answer that. Then that's my answer. I left Daniel's house and drove home through familiar neighborhoods, past the elementary school where I coached Little League, past the church where Martha and I had been married, past the construction sites where I'd spent 40 years building other people's dreams. 3 conversations. 3 opportunities for my children to choose love over money, relationship over control, trust over suspicion. 3 failures. That night, I called Jennifer Walsh at her home number. Jennifer, it's William Patterson. I'm ready to make some changes. Jennifer Walsh's office felt different on Friday morning. The warm wood furniture and family photos that had seemed comforting earlier in the week now looked like the setting for a war council. Which, I was beginning to understand, is exactly what this was. Mr. Patterson, thank you for coming in so quickly. Before we discuss any changes to your estate planning, I need to share some additional information that's come to light. She pulled out a thick folder, thicker than the one from our first meeting. My stomach clenched as I recognized what this meant. There was more. More evidence of my children's betrayal, more documentation of their systematic planning, more proof that the family I'd sacrificed everything to build had been calculating my downfall for longer than I'd imagined. Wednesday afternoon, after we spoke on the phone, I received a call from Patricia Brennan at Brennan & Associates. She's the senior partner at the firm where your daughter works. I knew that name. Brennan & Associates was one of the most prestigious and expensive law firms in the state. The kind of place that charged more per hour than most people made in a week. Patricia and I have worked together on several cases over the years. She called as a professional courtesy to give me a heads up about something her firm is preparing. Jennifer opened the folder and pulled out what looked like a formal legal document. The letterhead made my blood run cold. Brennan & Associates, attorney-client privilege, confidential legal strategy. Mr. Patterson, your children have retained Patricia's firm to begin formal proceedings for an adult guardianship petition. The preliminary paperwork was filed this morning. The words hit me like a physical blow. Guardianship petition. They'd actually done it. After our conversations earlier this week, after I confronted them directly about their intentions, they'd accelerated their timeline. What does that mean exactly? Jennifer's expression was grim. It means they're asking the court to declare you legally incompetent to manage your own affairs. If successful, one of them would be appointed as your guardian with complete legal authority over your finances, your medical decisions, your living arrangements, essentially your entire life. I felt the room spinning slightly, as if the ground beneath my feet had shifted. Can they do that? They can try. And based on what Patricia shared with me, they'd been preparing for this for much longer than we initially thought. She pulled out another document, a timeline that looked like something from a criminal investigation. Dates, locations, witnesses, evidence. A methodical breakdown of my supposed cognitive decline, documented with the precision of a scientific study. October 15, 2023. Subject gave $500 to housekeeper for personal expenses. November 3, 2023. Subject donated $1,000 to animal shelter without consulting family. November 18, 2023. Subject hired lawn service boy for college tuition assistance. December 1, 2023. Subject exhibited confusion about household finances during family dinner. Each entry was accompanied by witness statements, photographs, and detailed notes about my behavior, my decisions, my conversations. They'd been building their case for over 6 months. Jennifer, that dinner in December, I wasn't confused about finances. Marcus was questioning why I'd paid to have the roof repaired without getting multiple quotes. I told him that Jimmy Morrison had been doing roofing work for me for 15 years, and I trusted his assessment. That's not confusion. That's loyalty. I know. But in their documentation, it's presented as evidence that you're no longer capable of making rational financial decisions. She turned the page, revealing more entries. January 8, 2024. Subject became emotional when discussing deceased wife during family visit. January 22, 2024. Subject refused to discuss estate planning, claiming not ready to think about death yet. February 14, 2024. Subject gave expensive jewelry to housekeeper on Valentine's Day. I gave Jenny one of Martha's necklaces because it was the anniversary of Martha's death, and Jenny had been the one who held my hand during her final moments at the hospital. It was a gesture of gratitude, not a sign of mental illness. But in their presentation to the court, it will be characterized as inappropriate gift-giving to non-family members, combined with emotional instability and refusal to engage in responsible estate planning. Jennifer pulled out photographs, dozens of them. Pictures of me talking to Tommy Chin over the back fence. Images of me hugging Jenny Martinez outside my house. Photos of me writing checks at the animal shelter, the library, the food bank where Martha used to volunteer. They'd had you under surveillance for months, Mr. Patterson. Professional surveillance, not just family members with cameras. Why are you telling me this, Jennifer? What can I do about it? Jennifer leaned forward, her expression serious but determined. Because Patricia Brennan made a mistake. In her eagerness to give me a professional courtesy warning, she revealed information that was supposed to remain confidential until the petition was filed. And because what your children don't know is that I specialize in defending against exactly this type of case. She opened another folder, this one filled with medical reports, financial analysis, and psychological evaluations. Mr. Patterson, I took the liberty of having you evaluated by some of the state's leading experts in geriatric psychology and elder law. Dr. Michael Roberts, the neuropsychologist who examined you Tuesday afternoon while you thought you were getting a routine physical. Dr. Sandra Chin, the financial analyst who reviewed your complete financial history. Dr. James Mueller, the psychiatrist who's been observing your behavior and decision-making patterns. I remembered Tuesday afternoon. Dr. Mitchell had called to say she wanted to run some additional tests, just routine screenings for someone my age. I'd spent 3 hours at the medical center, taking what I had thought were standard cognitive assessments and physical evaluations. What did they find? Jennifer smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her all week. They found a 75-year-old man in excellent mental health, with above-average cognitive function for his age group, making thoughtful financial decisions consistent with his values and long-term relationships. She pulled out the reports, filled with technical language and professional assessments that painted a picture completely opposite to my children's documentation. Dr. Roberts found no evidence of cognitive decline, dementia, or impaired judgment. Your memory, reasoning, and decision-making capabilities are all within normal ranges for someone your age, and in several categories, you scored above average. What about the financial decisions they're calling evidence of incompetence? Dr. Chen's analysis shows a pattern of generous but reasonable charitable giving, consistent with someone who's reached financial stability and wants to share his good fortune. Your gifts to Ginny Martinez and Tommy Chen represent less than 2% of your total assets over the past year, hardly the reckless spending your children are claiming. Jennifer turned to the final report. Dr. Mueller's psychiatric evaluation found no evidence of depression, anxiety, or any other mental health condition that would impair your judgment. In fact, he noted that your emotional responses to your children's behavior are entirely appropriate and healthy. I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Maybe I wasn't losing my mind. Maybe I wasn't being manipulated by opportunistic strangers. Maybe the problem wasn't with me at all. Jennifer, what does this mean for their petition? It means they're going to lose. Badly. And it means we have grounds for some very serious counterclaims. She pulled out one final document, this one bearing the seal of the county court system. I prepared a counter-petition alleging elder abuse through financial manipulation and emotional exploitation. Your children's systematic campaign to have you declared incompetent, combined with their surveillance and documentation activities, constitutes a form of psychological abuse under state elder protection laws. Elder abuse. The words felt strange applied to my own children, but I was beginning to understand that's exactly what this was. There's more, Mr. Patterson. Patricia Breton's call revealed something else, something that changes everything. Jennifer opened her laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was a spreadsheet that looked like a business plan. Income projections, asset valuations, distribution schedules, all organized around a central premise that made my blood run cold. Your children have already divided your estate among themselves. Not in the hypothetical sense, in the practical sense. They've assigned specific assets to each sibling, calculated tax implications, and even obtained preliminary appraisals on your house and personal property. The spreadsheet was detailed and thorough. Marcus would get the house and sell it immediately, using the proceeds to expand his real estate business. Rebecca would inherit the investment accounts and Martha's jewelry. Daniel would receive the savings accounts and my collection of tools, apparently valued at $8,000, though I'd never thought of them as anything more than the instruments of my trade. They've also prepared a budget for your care after the guardianship is established. $2,200 per month for a nursing home, $150 per month for personal expenses, $75 per month for clothing and incidentals. What about Ginny? What about Tommy? What about the people who actually care about me? According to their plan, all non-family relationships will be managed to prevent further financial exploitation. Ginny Martinez will be terminated immediately. Tommy Chen will be prohibited from any contact with you. Dr. Mitchell will be replaced with a physician who specializes in geriatric patients with cognitive impairment. They were planning to isolate me completely from everyone who'd shown me genuine care and affection. Not content with taking my money, they wanted to take my relationships, my autonomy, my very identity. Mr. Patterson, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about money, though money is certainly part of it. This is about control. Your children have convinced themselves that they know better than you do how you should live, who you should care about, what you should do with your resources. I thought about Marcus's condescending explanation of my questionable financial decisions, about Rebecca's cold analysis of my inappropriate attachments to non-family members, about Daniel's tearful insistence that they were just trying to protect me from people who didn't really care. They really believe they're doing the right thing, don't they? In their minds, yes. They've constructed a narrative where you're the victim and they're the heroes, where your generosity is evidence of manipulation, Your independence is proof of vulnerability, and your relationships with caring people are signs of exploitation. Jennifer closed her laptop and looked at me directly. Mr. Patterson, what do you want to do? It was the first time in months that anyone had asked me what I wanted instead of telling me what I needed. I want to make sure that the people who've shown me genuine love and loyalty are taken care of. I want to make sure that my children understand there are consequences for treating their father like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved. Are you prepared for the emotional cost of what that means? I thought about Martha's diary, her worry about what would happen to me after she was gone, her hope that I would find people who saw me for myself rather than what I could provide, her fear that our children had learned to love what I gave more than who I was. Jennifer, I've been paying emotional costs for years. The cost of being generous to children who saw my kindness as weakness. The cost of supporting dreams that never included gratitude. The cost of loving people who measured my worth in dollars. I stood up from my chair, feeling stronger and more determined than I had since Martha died. I'm ready to stop paying those costs. I'm ready to invest my emotional energy in people who see me as more than a bank account with legs. Jennifer smiled and pulled out her drafting pad. Then let's talk about your new will. Do you think what he's planning to do is right? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that Martha had always loved. She used to say that October mornings made her feel like anything was possible, like the whole world was getting ready to start fresh. As I sat in my kitchen, preparing for what I knew would be the most important conversation of my life, I could almost hear her voice encouraging me to be brave. The new will sat on my kitchen table, signed and notarized, along with copies of all the medical evaluations, financial analysis, and legal documentation that Jennifer Walsh had prepared. 7 manila envelopes, each labeled with careful precision. 3 for my children, 1 for Jenny Martinez, 1 for Tommy Chun, 1 for Dr. Mitchell, and 1 master copy for my own records. At 10 a.m. sharp, I made 3 phone calls. Marcus, it's Dad. I need you, Rebecca, and Daniel at my house today at 2 p.m. This is not a request. Dad, I've got showings scheduled all afternoon. Can we do this tomorrow? Cancel them. This concerns your guardianship petition and the private investigators you've hired to watch me. Be here at 2 p.m. or face the consequences in court. The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. Marcus hadn't expected me to discover their legal maneuvering so quickly. Dad, I don't know what you think you found out, but 2 o'clock, Marcus. Don't be late. The second call went to Rebecca's personal cell phone. Daddy, I'm surprised to hear from you. Marcus said you were upset about something? Rebecca, family meeting today at 2 p.m. Your guardianship petition, your surveillance reports, and your mother's jewelry that you've already claimed in your estate division spreadsheet. We're going to discuss all of it. Daddy, I think there's been some misunderstanding. 2 o'clock. And Rebecca? Bring Tom. I want your husband to hear this too, since he's apparently been involved in planning your father's forced institutionalization. The third call was the hardest. Daniel had always been my baby, the one I'd hoped might remember that love was more important than money. Hey, Dad. Marcus called me. He said you're pretty worked up about something. Daniel, 2 p.m. today. Bring Michelle and the kids if you want. I think it's important for my grandchildren to see how their parents treat family. Dad, the kids don't need to be involved in whatever this is about. You're right. They don't need to see their grandfather being treated like a mentally incompetent burden by people who should love him. Leave them with a babysitter. By 1:45 p.m., all 3 cars were in my driveway. Marcus's BMW, Rebecca's Lexus, and Daniel's sedan, parked like vehicles at a funeral. Through my front window, I could see my children sitting in their cars, probably coordinating their strategy on their cell phones, probably discussing how to handle their father's latest episode. I opened the front door before any of them could knock. "Come in." "Living room." They filed in, with the solemn expressions of people attending a wake, which wasn't far from the truth. Today, the family I thought I was building for 50 years was going to die, and the family I actually had was going to be born. Marcus sat in his usual spot on the couch, flanked by Rebecca and Daniel. Their spouses arranged themselves in the chairs nearby, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. The 7 manila envelopes sat on the coffee table between us like unexploded bombs. "Before anyone says anything," I began, standing in front of the mantelpiece where 5 decades of family photos chronicled our history. "I want you to know that I've spent the last week learning some very interesting things about my children." I picked up the first envelope and opened it, pulling out the surveillance photographs that had documented 6 months of my daily life. "Marcus, these are very artistic. Professional quality. The shot of me hugging Jenny Martinez after her grandson's surgery is particularly touching. Too bad you saw it as evidence of mental incompetence instead of basic human decency." Marcus's face went pale. "Dad, how did you get those?" "I hired my own lawyer, son. Jennifer Walsh. She specializes in defending against elder abuse cases." Rebecca straightened in her chair, her legal training engaging. "Daddy, elder abuse is a very serious accusation." "Yes, it is. Which is why I have filed formal charges with the State Elder Protection Services against all 3 of you." The room fell silent except for the ticking of Martha's grandfather clock. I opened the second envelope. "Rebecca, this is your guardianship petition. Very thorough. Very professional. I particularly enjoyed the part where you claim I'm no longer capable of making rational decisions about my finances or personal relationships. Daddy, we were trying to protect you." "From what?" "From being generous to people who've earned it. From maintaining relationships with people who actually care whether I live or die." I pulled out the spreadsheet that showed how they divided my assets among themselves. "Daniel, I see you've claimed my tool collection. $8,000, according to your appraisal. Did it occur to you that those tools built this house? That they'd put food on your table and clothes on your back for the first 18 years of your life?" Daniel couldn't meet my eyes. "Dad, we never meant for you to see that. It was just preliminary planning. Planning for my incapacity while I'm still perfectly competent. Planning to isolate me from everyone who cares about me. Planning to stick me in a nursing home for $2,200 a month while you sell my house and divide the proceeds." I walked to the window and looked out at the yard where I'd taught each of them to ride bikes, where we'd play catch on summer evenings, where Martha had tended the garden that still bloomed every spring with the flowers she'd planted. "I had you all independently evaluated by medical and psychological professionals this week." Marcus leaned forward. "Dad, that's not legal without our consent." "Actually, it is. I'm still legally competent to make my own medical decisions, despite your petition claiming otherwise." I opened the third envelope and pulled out Dr. Roberts' neuropsychological evaluation. Cognitive function normal for age group. Memory excellent. Decision-making capacity unimpaired. No evidence of dementia, depression, or any condition that would affect my judgment. Rebecca's husband Tom shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He'd been the one pushing hardest for the guardianship, according to the documentation Jennifer had obtained. "The financial analysis is equally interesting," I continued, opening the fourth envelope. "Dr. Chen found that my charitable giving represents less than 2% of my total assets annually. Hardly the reckless spending you've claimed to justify taking control of my finances." I turned back to face my children, these 3 adults who'd somehow convinced themselves that systematically planning their father's loss of autonomy was an act of love. But the most interesting evaluation came from Dr. Mueller, the psychiatrist. I pulled out the final professional report. He found that my emotional responses to your behavior are not only normal but healthy. He also noted that your systematic campaign to undermine my independence while documenting my daily activities constitutes a form of psychological abuse. Daniel stood up abruptly. Dad, we love you. We're not abusing you. We're trying to help. Help me what, Daniel? Help me lose my right to make decisions about my own money. Help me lose relationships with people who've shown me genuine care. Help me accept that my children see me as a problem to be managed instead of a father to be loved. I walked to the coffee table and picked up the remaining 3 envelopes. Since you've all been so concerned about my estate planning, I thought you should know that I've taken your advice and updated my will. I handed Marcus his envelope. This is your copy. He opened it with trembling fingers, scanning the legal language until he found the relevant section. His face went white. Dad, this says you're leaving me $1. That's correct. $1 for each year you spent planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. I handed Rebecca her envelope. She opened it with the careful precision of someone defusing a bomb. Daddy, you can't be serious. $1, Rebecca. The exact value of a daughter who uses her legal training to research ways to steal her father's autonomy. Daniel's envelope shook in his hands as he read his inheritance. $1, and a letter explaining that his portion of the estate would have been substantial if he'd chosen to be a son instead of a conspirator. The rest of my estate, I continued, goes to people who've treated me like family instead of treating me like a bank account. Jenny Martinez, who held my hand during your mother's final moments and never asked for anything in return. Tommy Chin, who spent Christmas Day with me last year because he knew I was lonely and never calculated what that kindness might be worth. Dr. Mitchell, who's been treating me like family for 15 years. The Children's Hospital where your mother volunteered. The scholarship fund I'm establishing for kids who remind me of myself at 18. Marcus found his voice first. Dad, you can't do this. We'll contest the will. We'll prove you were manipulated. By whom? By my team of medical professionals who certified my mental competence. By my attorney who specializes in protecting elderly people from exploitation by their own families. I walked back to the mantelpiece and picked up my favorite photo of the 4 of us, taken at Rebecca's law school graduation, when we all still believed we were a real family. Marcus, do you remember when you were 8 and wanted that expensive bicycle for Christmas? I worked overtime for 3 months to afford it. When you saw it Christmas morning, you hugged me and said I was the best dad in the world. Marcus's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't finished. Rebecca, do you remember when you called me crying from law school, worried about failing constitutional law? I drove 6 hours to spend the weekend helping you study. You said you didn't know what you'd do without me. Rebecca was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration that their plan had failed. Daniel, do you remember your first business plan? The one that failed and left you $50,000 in debt? I emptied my retirement account to bail you out. You promised you'd never forget what I'd sacrificed for you. I set the photograph face down on the mantel. Those children, those loving children who appreciated their father's sacrifices, where did they go? When did you stop seeing me as the man who loved you unconditionally and start seeing me as an obstacle standing between you and your inheritance? The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. I want you to leave my house now. All of you. Dad, Daniel said, his voice breaking. Please. We can work this out. We made mistakes, but we're still family. Are we? Because family doesn't hire private investigators to document their father's kindness as evidence of mental illness. Family doesn't petition the court to steal an elderly parent's legal rights. Family doesn't create spreadsheets dividing up a living person's possessions like he's already dead. I walked to the front door and opened it. You have 30 days to contest the will if you choose. My attorney assures me you'll lose, but you're welcome to try. In the meantime, stay away from my house, stay away from my friends, and stay away from me. They left without another word, gathering their copies of my new will and walking out of my house, like defeated soldiers retreating from a lost battle. Through the window, I watched them stand in my driveway for several minutes, probably trying to decide whether to regroup for another assault or retreat to plan their legal strategy. Eventually, they drove away in their expensive cars, leaving me alone in the house I'd built with my own hands. But for the first time in years, alone didn't feel lonely. It felt like freedom. I called Jenny Martinez first. Jenny, it's Mr. William. Could you come over this afternoon? I have something I'd like to discuss with you. Then Tommy Chin. Tommy, are you free for dinner tonight? I've got some news I think you'll be interested in hearing. Finally, Dr. Mitchell. Sarah, this is William. I wanted to let you know that I've made some decisions about my future. Good decisions. And I'd like to thank you for helping me understand that I'm not losing my mind after all. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs, and I realized that for the first time since Martha died, I felt at peace. Not the peace of resignation, but the peace of a man who'd finally learned the difference between being loved and being used. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new relationships, new possibilities. Tonight, I would sit in my chair and remember what it felt like to have the power to choose my own family. 1 year later, I stood in my backyard watching Tommy Chin teach his younger sister Lucy how to throw a proper curveball. The autumn afternoon was crisp and golden, with the kind of light that made everything look like it belonged in a painting. Martha would have loved this scene. Children's laughter filling the air, the smell of Jenny Martinez's famous tamales drifting from my kitchen window, the sound of genuine happiness replacing the careful conversations that had defined my life for so many years. Mr. Patterson! Lucy called out, her pigtails bouncing as she wound up for another pitch. Did you see that one? It curved just like Tommy showed me. At 13, Lucy had her brother's determination, but none of his natural athletic ability. What she lacked in skill, she made up for in pure stubborn persistence, a quality I'd always admired and tried to nurture in the young people in my life. Keep your eye on the target, sweetheart. I called back from my spot in the wooden rocking chair Tommy had built for my 76th birthday. The ball goes where you're looking. Tommy jogged over with the easy grace of a 22-year-old who'd grown comfortable in his own skin. Engineering school had been good to him, not just the education, but the confidence that came from knowing he could build a future with his own hands and mind. She's getting better, he said, settling onto the porch steps. Reminds me of someone else I know who never gave up on anything, even when it got difficult. I smiled, thinking about the parallels between teaching a child to throw a curveball and learning to navigate the curveballs that life throws at you. Both required patience, practice, and the willingness to keep trying even when the results weren't immediately perfect. Tommy, has anyone ever told you you're wise beyond your years? Yeah, this old guy I know. He's been teaching me about more than just lawn mowing and snow shoveling for the past few years. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted our conversation. Dr. Mitchell's Honda Civic, arriving right on time for our weekly Sunday dinner. Sarah had become a regular fixture in our household after her husband passed away 8 months ago, and I discovered that grief shared with understanding friends was far more bearable than grief carried alone. William, she called out, emerging from her car with a covered dish that smelled like her famous apple cobbler. I brought dessert, and I brought news. At 62, Sarah Mitchell had the kind of energy that came from a lifetime of helping people heal. Her hair had gone completely silver in the years since her husband died, but her eyes still sparkled with the curiosity and compassion that made her such an exceptional physician. "Good news or bad news?" I asked as she climbed the porch steps. "Good news. Great news, actually. The scholarship fund has been approved for expansion. We'll be able to help 30 students next year instead of 15. The William and Martha Patterson Educational Foundation had been my proudest achievement over the past year. Using the money I'd originally planned to leave my biological children, we'd established a scholarship program for students from low-income families who showed both academic promise and strong character. The kind of young people who reminded me of myself at 18, when determination and hard work were the only inheritance my father could leave me. 30 students, I repeated, savoring the number. Martha would be so proud. She would be, Sarah agreed, settling into the chair beside mine. And I think she'd be proud of the man you've become this past year, too. Through the screen door, I could hear Ginny Martinez humming while she set the table for our extended family dinner. At 59, Ginny had become far more than a housekeeper. She was the heart of our chosen family, the one who remembered everyone's birthdays and made sure nobody felt forgotten or left out. Her grandson Miguel was home from college for the weekend, full of stories about his engineering courses and plans for his future. The scholarship money I'd provided for his education was already paying dividends, not just in his grades, but in his confidence and his dreams. "Mr. William," Jenny called from the kitchen. "Dinner's ready when everyone else gets here." Everyone else. The phrase made me smile because it represented something I'd never had with my biological children. The certainty that people were coming to my dinner table because they wanted to be there, not because they felt obligated or because they needed something from me. Pastor James arrived a few minutes later, his ancient pickup truck coughing to a stop behind Sarah's car. At 70, James had the kind of weathered face that came from decades of comforting people through their worst moments and celebrating with them through their best ones. He'd become not just my spiritual advisor, but a genuine friend, someone who understood that faith and family weren't always the same thing. "William, my friend," he said, climbing out of his truck with the careful movements of someone whose knees had carried him through 7 decades of service to others. "How are you feeling today?" "Like a man who's finally learned the difference between being alone and being lonely," I replied, which was the truth I discovered over the past year. The dining room table that had once hosted tense conversations about estate planning and guardianship petitions now welcomed people who came to share stories, laughter, and genuine concern for each other's well-being. Tommy and Lucy, Jenny and Miguel, Sarah and James, 6 people who'd chosen to spend their Sunday afternoons with an old man because they enjoyed his company, not because they wanted his money. Over dinner, Miguel shared his excitement about an internship he'd been offered with a construction company that specialized in sustainable building practices. Tommy talked about his plans to start his own engineering consulting firm after graduation. Lucy complained about a boy in her 8th grade class who kept trying to impress her by showing off during baseball practice. "Boys are stupid when they like you," she declared with the absolute certainty of someone who'd observed 13 years of human behavior and reached definitive conclusions. "They get better," Sarah assured her with a grin. "Eventually. Some of them do," Jenny added diplomatically. "The smart ones figure out that showing off isn't as impressive as showing up." I listened to the easy conversation flowing around my table and marveled at how different this felt from the careful, calculated discussions I'd endured with my biological children. These people asked about my health because they cared about my well-being, not because they were monitoring my capacity to manage my affairs. They shared their problems and their triumphs because they trusted me to respond with love instead of judgment. After dinner, while Ginny and Sarah cleaned up despite my protests that guests shouldn't do dishes, I found myself alone on the back porch with Pastor James. The sun was setting behind the trees that Martha and I had planted 40 years ago, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded me why she'd loved this view so much. "William, can I ask you something personal? James, at our age, is there any other kind of question?" He laughed, but his expression grew serious. "Do you ever regret your decision about your children?" It was a question I'd asked myself many times over the past year, especially during the quiet moments when the house felt too empty and my memories felt too heavy. "I regret that it was necessary," I said finally. "I regret that 3 people I loved more than my own life chose money over relationships. I regret that I spent 50 years enabling behavior that ultimately destroyed our family. But do you regret the actual decision?" I thought about the letter I'd received from Daniel 3 months ago, the first communication from any of my children since our confrontation the previous year. He'd written to tell me that Marcus and Rebecca were still pursuing legal challenges to my will, still convinced that I'd been manipulated by people who didn't have my best interests at heart. But Daniel's letter had been different. Not an apology, exactly, but an acknowledgement that he was trying to understand how their family had reached such a devastating conclusion. He'd asked if there was any possibility of rebuilding some kind of relationship, not based on money or inheritance, but based on the love they'd once shared. I hadn't answered his letter yet. I wasn't sure I ever would. "James, I spent 75 years measuring my worth as a father by how much I could give my children. The more I sacrificed, the better father I thought I was. But all I really did was teach them that my love was conditional on their need, and that their love for me was measured by their gratitude." The evening air was cooling, and I pulled Martha's old sweater tighter around my shoulders. She'd knitted it for me 20 years ago, and wearing it still made me feel like she was wrapping her arms around me. "The people sitting around my dinner table tonight don't need my money to survive. They don't see me as a solution to their problems. They see me as a person worth caring about, worth spending time with, worth loving for who I am instead of what I can provide." Pastor James nodded thoughtfully. "And that's worth more than blood relationship? James, I've learned that blood makes you related, but it doesn't make you family. Family is what you choose to build with people who choose to build it with you." A car pulled into my driveway, and I recognized the sound of Daniel's sedan immediately. My youngest son sat behind the wheel for several minutes, just as he had a year ago when he'd come for the confrontation that ended our relationship as father and son. "Do you want me to stay?" Pastor James asked quietly. "Please." Daniel walked across the lawn slowly, his movements uncertain and hesitant. At 43, he looked older than his years, stress and regret aging him in ways that went deeper than simple time. He'd lost weight, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. "Hello, Dad." "Daniel, I brought you something." He held out a small wooden box, his hand shaking slightly. "I made it myself, in a woodworking class I've been taking." The box was simple but beautifully crafted, made from oak and finished with the kind of care that comes from working with your hands instead of just your mind. Inside was a small brass nameplate. "William Patterson, a man who built things that last." "I remembered what you used to say when you were teaching me to use your tools," Daniel said quietly. "Measure twice, cut once. Take your time. Build things that last." I held the box in my hands, feeling the smooth finish and solid construction. It was the first gift any of my children had given me in years that wasn't purchased with money, but created with time and effort. "Thank you, Daniel. It's beautiful." "Dad, I know you probably don't want to hear this, but I need to say it anyway." His voice cracked with emotion. "I've been thinking about Mom's diary entries that you mentioned last year, about how she worried that we loved what you could give us more than who you were." I waited, not making this easier for him, but not making it harder either. "She was right. Somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing you as our father and started seeing you as a resource, a solution to our problems. A safety net that would always be there no matter how we treated you. Tears were streaming down his face now, and I saw in him the little boy who used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms scared him. I can't speak for Marcus and Rebecca. They're still angry, still convinced you've been manipulated by people who don't really care about you. But I wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand that you didn't choose strangers over family. You chose people who treated you like family over people who treated you like strangers. Pastor James stood up quietly and walked into the house, giving us privacy for what might be our last conversation as father and son. Daniel, do you remember what I told you the day you graduated college? He nodded, tears making his voice thick. You said you were proud of the man I'd become. Are you proud of the man you became? The question hung in the evening air like smoke from a dying fire. Daniel looked up at me with eyes full of pain and something that might have been hope. No, he whispered. I'm not. But I'm trying to become someone different. Someone who deserves to be your son again, not because of what you can give me, but because of who I choose to be. Daniel, the door is always open. But you don't walk through it as my heir. You walk through it as my child, if that's what you choose to be. He broke down then, 50 years of conditioning and 3 years of grief pouring out in sobs that shook his entire body. I held him the way I'd held him when he was 8 years old and had fallen off his bike, remembering that some wounds go deeper than scraped knees and take longer to heal. I missed her so much, Dad, he whispered. I miss Mom so much, and I didn't know how to miss her without being angry at everything else. I know, son. I know. We sat there as the last light faded from the sky, a father and son learning how to love each other again without conditions or calculations. It wasn't forgiveness. That would take time, if it ever came at all. But it was a beginning, a tentative first step toward building something new from the wreckage of what we'd lost. Later, after Daniel had stayed for dessert and met Tommy and Lucy properly, after he'd helped Jenny clean up and promised Pastor James he'd think about attending church services, after he'd left with genuine plans to return the following Sunday, I sat alone on my porch with Martha's ring on my finger and peace in my heart. The house was quiet now, but it was a good quiet. The kind of silence that comes at the end of a day well lived, filled with laughter and honest conversation and the possibility of redemption. I thought about Marcus and Rebecca, still fighting their legal battles somewhere across town, still measuring everything in terms of financial loss and gain. Maybe someday they'd find their way back to remembering what really mattered. Maybe they wouldn't. Either way, I'd learned something my father never taught me. You can't force people to love you, but you can choose to love yourself enough to accept only authentic love in return. The scholarship recipients would graduate and move on to careers that might change the world. Jenny would continue to care for people who needed caring. Tommy would build things that lasted, just like his mentor had taught him. Sarah would heal people, Pastor James would comfort souls, and Lucy would grow up knowing that love doesn't have a price tag. And I would continue to learn, at 76 years old, that the best inheritance you can leave isn't money. It's the example of how to love and be loved without conditions, how to choose family based on hearts instead of bloodlines, and how to find peace in relationships built on mutual respect instead of mutual need. Martha's sweater was warm around my shoulders, and I could almost hear her voice on the evening breeze. You finally figured it out, William. Family isn't what you're born into. It's what you choose to build with people who choose to build it with you. The house welcomed me home as I stood to go inside, filled with new memories and the promise of many more Sunday dinners to come. Family dinners, with people who'd chosen to call me family not because they had to, but because they wanted to. It had taken me 76 years, but I'd finally learned the difference between being loved for what I could give and being loved for who I was. And that, I realized, was the only inheritance that truly mattered. Thank you for joining us for this powerful story of family, forgiveness, and finding love in unexpected places. If this touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe for more stories that remind us what really matters in life. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing how these stories impact you. Remember, the strongest families aren't always the ones we're born into, but the ones we choose to build with people who truly see and value who we are.